You know how it is when you're walking down the street or you're driving down the street and someone shows up and you feel like you can tell everything about that person by what you are seeing. The clothing, the coloring, the cleanliness, the disheveledness, whatever. You look at that person, you go, yeah, I know everything about you. Human beings have an incredible capability that is pattern recognition. We have it as a survival mechanism. It's fundamental. It's absolutely essential to our well-being. But it gets in the way. It gets in the way when we decide how we are going to behave based on what we have decided about something before we ever saw it. Right? E.B. White said, prejudice is very handy. You can make up your mind about things without ever bothering to educate yourself. When you did the reading with the chalice lighting this morning, I was reminded of a story that fits very well with this topic. The American philosophy professor wants to learn something about Zen Buddhism, so he goes to Japan and flies above the clouds. And he gets to Japan and he's meeting with this very, very well-known Zen master. And he comes up to the house, he remembers to take off his shoes, and his, the wife escorts him into the room where the master is sitting, and there's a low table there, and the master invites him to sit down across from him, and the wife brings him a pot of tea and 2 cups, and they're chatting briefly, this and that and the other. And the Zen master picks up the pot of tea. Some of you already know the answer to this one. I've heard this story. And and he reaches for the professor's cup, and he starts pouring, and continues pouring, and continues pouring. And the philosophy professor, stop! It's too full. So are some minds. There was no room in the philosopher professor's mind for what the Zen master had to offer. One of the things I love about my Unitarian congregations over the years is that's rarely the situation. There are some topics, however, on which we have made up our minds. And it is worth it to us to consider whether we want to hold the fullness of those positions. I was delighted this week, one of my news feeds, I follow technology and business in the world, and one of them was the CEO of one of the Silicon Valley kinds of firms. The headline says, CEO of Salesforce follows same mental tradition as gave Steve Jobs his success. And I'm going, really? Which one is that? Knowing that Steve Jobs' book, or the only book he carried with him, was the autobiography of a yogi. Well, it turns out they're talking about something that is the title of the book. And David Suzuki wrote it, and it's, you don't even need to read the book. Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. Entering into every situation as if you knew nothing about the situation. Bringing no assumptions, no prejudgments. Discovering what is here in this moment, fresh, as a beginner. Very powerful tool. How nice of the world to give me the material for this talk. When we bring that survival capacity of pattern recognition and, history, bringing history to the moment, we limit what is possible. And that's a good thing in certain situations. You want to have a limited range of options when a lion is running towards you. Right? You want to know precisely what might happen and how you want to respond. What has happened in our culture is we've taken that ability and that predisposition and applied it in every situation. We make up our minds before we enter a room what it is we're going to experience. I had the marvelous reminder the other day. Someone received a letter from some address they didn't recognize, and I happened to be in the room when they opened it, and they didn't even fully read the letter. They just glanced over keywords, the 3-second read, and went into great distress. Because, first of all, a legal size envelope from an address they didn't recognize. That was setting them up. So they were already moving into a prejudgment, a set of assumptions, right? Then they open it and they see that it is, an agency that has some power over what they can do. That sets them up even further. And then they see 3 keywords that look like, my God, I owe them a lot of money. That's what came out. And so we went through about half an hour of reaction to the 3-second glance at this letter. And I withheld the temptation to pick it up and actually read it. But I did, after we got through the reaction, ask a question or two that caused it to get picked up and reread again. And lo and behold, it wasn't anywhere nearly as catastrophic as the prejudgment and assumptions had led the reader to expect and experience. Experienced all of the distress totally unnecessarily. And I've done the same thing. I bet everyone in the room has some variation on that story. Right? And especially if you grew up with a critical parent, as many of us did, you expect that stuff. It's an assumption. It's a prejudgment. When I was living in Portland, at one point, I was working part-time with the city as a neighborhood watch coordinator. I wanted to do community development, and this was a way to do it. And so my job was, whenever a block asked for it, when some people on a block in one of the communities I was responsible for called up and said, either we're afraid something is going to happen or something awful has happened, would you come and help organize us? I would go in, and I had a little kind of Tupperware party thing that I did with them, and bring in the police officer if I could, and we would do this. And part of what I would do is I would encourage them to develop a series of activities other than Crime Watch, right? And what I found was the people who were most afraid of specific stereotypes were the least likely to do the other activities. Okay? So the young black man in the hoodie, or the ragamuffin guy with the backpack, if you will, I use that language, or the Hispanic, with the kind of uppity attitude, were the things the stereotypes, the 3 stereotypes that Portlanders at that time held as this is someone to watch out for and someone to be afraid of. The blocks that recognized anybody could be a problem and anyone could be a contribution started doing things like, garden sharing, child care sharing, neighborhood block parties. We had a list of a dozen things. And 12 years later, they were still organized. They were still doing things. They were still having a good time. The ones that were so concerned that certain stereotypical characters might possibly be in the neighborhood stayed in that fear space and didn't do any of those other activities, and they had fallen apart within 1 to 2 years consistently. Stereotyping is part of pattern recognition. We need to do a little bit of that, especially in a society that has very specific behaviors that are appropriate for very specific people. Ours, that specific behavior thing is beginning to dissolve, yay. maybe you're from a nation where this happens, right? Or something else. So specific behaviors are appropriate. We don't do that anymore. You know, we call everyone by their first name. We say hi to everybody. You know, doffing a hat. I haven't seen that happen in years. All right. So there's a whole realm of behaviors we no longer need the stereotype, you know, pattern recognition for. Isn't that interesting? And our kids and our grandkids don't know what to do with that. Don't know what to do when we start stereotyping. Because they don't have any patterning, any training that says you behave a certain way around people who look like such and such. Isn't that nice? So there is a new culture emerging. One that isn't based on that set of prejudgments and assumptions. It's got other ones, but not that set. And I think it's very interesting that we're also at the same time having other kinds of prejudgments and assumptions emerge in a very big way. And we don't quite know what to do with them. And what I'm going to suggest is when you are seeing all that in the media, it's an opportunity to look at what remains of prejudging and assuming in our own thinking. What remains of the assumption that the guy on the street with the sign could be doing something better than that? What remains of the assumption that the person lighting up a joint, you know, could be doing something better than that, or taking, you know, overtaking medications, or whatever it is that pushes your buttons? That assumption comes from some childhood decision that goes with this pattern recognition behavior that all human beings have. And you get to choose. Now, the reason we all have it is because it's wired into our brains. It's wired into the bird brain, the lowest level brain, the reptilian bird brain. And that, by the way, has been very carefully developed or exploited by psychiatrists working for the people who build the Hummer. The reptilian brain, they carefully work on that one. So that, you know, a sweet little old lady, when they walk, you know, who walks into a Hummer showroom may come out with a Hummer. They figured out how to do it so that that part of us that feels vulnerable and has to get rid of the other, whatever the other is, has to be protected from and get rid of the other. You've heard about birds pecking, you know, killing another bird because it looks different, right? That isn't true of all varieties, by the way. I just saw a wonderful story of the prairie hen that follows the bison. They're following the bison. They can't stop and nest. So they lay their eggs in other birds' nests. And the other birds take care of their babies. Wow. Isn't that cool?
Yeah.
So not all birds are prejudiced.
Put my eggs anywhere.
So the bird brain says, this is us, that is other, that's not okay. But we're also mammals. So we have a mammalian brain that can override the bird brain. Now the mammal says, what's that? That's different. I'm curious. Every baby mammal, right? Out there checking things out. It's interesting. It's fun. What is that? Oh, it moves. Oh, it sparkles. Right? And ravens do that. So, you know, the mammalian brain wants to know more. The bird brain says, go away. The mammalian brain wants more. Explore that. Discover that. What is it? Maybe I can enjoy it in some interesting way. Okay? So we do have the power to override the bird brain, just as mammals. And then add the cerebral cortex on top of that. And the cerebral cortex says, I can take this apart. I can understand it. I can analyze it. I can communicate what I understand to someone else. That's that side. And that tends to be where Unitarians congregate. But we sometimes have areas where we go back to the vertebrae. Something to be aware of. And then there's another part of the cerebral cortex that has not been addressed in our culture very much, and that's this side. And it says, oh, wow, look how we're alive. Look how we're related. Isn't this cool? It's all interconnected. I like this. And if you want more of that, go watch Jill Bolta-Taylor's My Stroke of Insight TED Talk. Fabulous.
Well, repeat that, please.
My Stroke of Insight is the book. The author is Jill Bolton without an N, Taylor. And she's a brain scientist who had a stroke on the left side of the brain. And she would float back and forth between the two as she was dealing with trying to get a phone, trying to call someone for help. And she does a beautiful description of floating back and forth between the left brain. Oh yeah, you gotta call someone. Oh, here's a card, here's the phone number. Okay, start to dial. Oh, look at that. Isn't this marvelous? I've had a stroke. So, if we only go with the analytical, understanding, communicating part of us, we're leaving out some of the experience. And that's why it was the last, but it's very much a part of the 7 principles, that we are part of an interconnected web of all life. Because we began to wake up to that holistic aspect of the brain, and the cerebral cortex. And so as we encounter that which we think we know everything about just because we know everything about it, we might consider which part of the brain are we using? Is that a stereotype other that I have not even been willing to look at? Or is that something that I'm kind of curious about because, well, all mammals are curious? Or is that something I recognize even if on the surface there is no similarity between us? We are. We are the one being that is throughout all beings. And this is just another aspect showing us that. The joy of showing up with beginner's mind is you get to watch yourself go through all of those and to choose to go through all of those. The candle is this. Candle went out. Yes. Yeah. So, I think as we consider ourselves, as Unitarian Universalists, as human beings on the planet, we need to recognize who and what we are and what we are bringing to each situation and make a conscious choice. Conscious, intentional choice. Who am I going to be here and now? And what will I allow myself to experience here and now? And being as open as possible in that song, my open heart, that was so sweet. My open heart. That's a way of saying allowing the right brain to have its input to what I'm experiencing. Gives us a whole new depth, a whole new way of being in the world, and allows us to leave behind some of the traps and distressing experiences that we got set up for
in a culture that encouraged us to stereotype and then discriminate against those who did not fit